Hello everybody and welcome to my presentation on the jet engine. My name is Jake Sikora. I'm currently a private pilot student, and what we're going to look at today is the development of the jet engine, the invention of it, and how it's affected aviation from the point of the first commercial airliner up to today. So let's go ahead and get started. And we will begin with the invention of the jet engine. Now you could say that the invention was shared between Hans von Ohain, German, and Sir Frank Whittle, who was British. But Whittle was the first to think of the idea. Whittle joined the RAF in the 1920s, and he was considered a very talented pilot. And he pushed the limits of his plane, flying at very fast speeds. Propellers had reached their limit to the point where if you had them at a faster RPM, they'd kind of just fall apart. So we got thinking of the idea of an engine that would be able to fly faster and at higher altitudes, and that was the idea of the jet engine. He proposed this idea to A.A. Griffith, who was the senior RAF engineer, but Griffith turned it down instantly, said, "It's a great idea, but it won't work, that the metals won't be able to withstand the heats that you're proposing that would happen in this jet engine." So that kind of put a halt on the jet engine for the British. So the Germans, especially Hitler, had a greater interest in the jet engine. They saw a lot more opportunity in it than the British did. So Ohain got permission and started working on the jet engine in 1935. He worked on a design that was very similar to Whittle's, and he made it fly. August 1939, the Heinkel HE-178 first flew. However, it only flew for 6 minutes until the engine began to melt because, of course, the metals weren't strong enough, and it had to make a forced landing. World War II begins the next month, however, and then the British start investing in the jet engine as part of the war effort. The British come up with a nickel and titanium alloy to use in the jet engine, and on the 11th of April, 1941, they get a Gloucester Mark I to fly for 17 minutes. And with this flight, it had absolutely no signs of overheating. So now, after talking about the invention of the jet engine, let's talk about how it works. Let's use this turbojet diagram for example. And the turbojet was the design used on the first jet airliners, which we'll get to later. So let's say that this jet is flying at a nice high altitude. Air is sucked in through the intake with these fan blades and goes through the compression chamber, where due to the compression of the air has a higher O2 content and is warmed up. It then enters the combustion chamber where it is sprayed with a fuel. That fuel-air mixture will be ignited and shot out the exhaust. In the exhaust, we have a turbine which will drive the fans at the front, sucking in more air and keeping the engine running continuously. So, the war is ended, 1945. We have this new invention, the jet engine, but we're not using it for war anymore. We're going to start using it for commercial aviation. And the first plane to do that is the de Havilland Comet. It's a turbojet with a top speed of 500 miles an hour, a ceiling of 35,000 feet, and a range of about 1,750 miles. The Comet first entered service in May of 1952 in Europe. It was lightweight, had a very weak frame and square windows, which is very interesting to note. So after a series of incidents in Europe, they grounded the fleet to try to figure out what the problem was. And they found out after multiple pressurizations of the cabin, the skin of the aircraft became weaker and weaker. And it would fail at the corners of these square windows. And during flight, the Comet would have an explosive decompression. So they grounded the fleet and came out with the Comet 4, which was going to fix all the problems. But by that time, the 707 was going to come out. Many airlines have already ordered the 707, and that was going to become the popular jet of the late 50s and early 60s. So now we have the Boeing 707. The 707 was developed by Boeing from 1958 to 1979. Had a wingspan of 146 feet, a takeoff weight of 320,000 pounds, and a range of about 3,000 miles, depending on the variants of first entered service in 1963 with Pan American, and it was used to fly domestic, transcontinental, and transatlantic flights, not only for Pan American, but for all airlines. Over the course of its development, Boeing delivered 1,011 707s to airlines across the world. So this map here shows all the routes that Pan American flew in the 1960s, and these routes wouldn't have been possible without the 707. You can see how we were able to fly across the Atlantic non-stop, and we could fly across Pacific with a short stop in Honolulu. This map really shows how jet travel is globalizing the world and making the world smaller. Instead of taking about a week to sail from New York to London, it takes about 6 hours now on a jet plane, which really shows the power of the invention of the jet engine. So as revolutionary as the 707 was, as far as commercial aviation, it really became a victim of its own success in the late 60s, where so many people were now able to afford flight. The 707 wasn't able to meet the demand for all the passengers, so that led to the invention of bigger aircraft such as the 747. So now we have the 747 on the scene. It has a 196-foot wingspan, a 6,000-mile range, and a max takeoff weight of 735,000 pounds. Now the 747 is known as the jumbo jet of the Queen of the Skies, and that's because of its sheer size. When the 747 though was introduced to the public, it still couldn't fly. The engines were only decorative for the introduction. No commercial engines, no turbojet engines at the time could even lift that weight, or lift half the weight of the 747. So Pratt & Whitney came up with the JT19 high bypass turbofan engines, which were the first to be used. They had a very high efficiency, low noise, and great thrust. So the invention of the turbofan engine was practically the invention of the modern commercial jet engine, because that is all that is used today on modern commercial airliners is a turbofan. What this turbofan did is it had a large fan on the front. In the case of the 747, that fan had an 8-foot diameter. And about 90% of the air bypasses the core of the jet engine and is thrusted backwards instead of through the jet engine, which gives it a much greater efficiency. The jet engine still runs the same, but in this case of the turbofan, the turbine in the rear of this jet engine drives the fan in the front. So the 747's first flight was on the 9th of February 1969. And as of today, 1,556 have been built. The 747 is still flown today by many airlines across the world, but airlines are starting to phase them out for more efficient aircraft. 747 expanded the jet's reach and made the world even smaller with its range. Also, the 747 made flying much more cheaper due to its capacity of around 400 passengers. So unlike the 707, you weren't going to the airport in a suit and tie, you were wearing sandals or flip-flops and shorts. So even though that the 747 is being phased out of most airlines across the globe, it'll always remain an iconic airplane, both in the aviation community and in pop culture. So in that respect, I don't think that it's ever truly going to disappear. So we lived in the jet age for about 70 years now, and today there is a huge demand for very fuel-efficient aircraft. We're going to use the 787 for example. It's not as large as the 747, yet the engines have a much greater diameter than the ones on the 747. That is because we don't need such a large core of the jet to be producing all the thrust. Instead, we have a smaller core and a larger fan out front that's producing all the thrust instead of a core, because that core is just burning up fuel to turn that fan to front. That bigger fan is producing a whole bunch of thrust in comparison to the core of the engine. So I think we'll continue on that trend to have larger jet engines up to a point, though, because at some point they're going to start producing more drag than they do thrust. But then after that, I'm not sure what the future of jet engines would be. Maybe we get to a point where we have to find a new source of propulsion for commercial aircraft other than the jet engine. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. My name is Jake Sikora, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.